Hello, and welcome to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. I'm Mario Sakura, and this is the place where my co-hosts TJ Dahl and TJ Ingracia and I discuss movies through the lens of the Enneagram model of personality. If you like the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and join the conversation on our social media pages. For now, grab some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show. Hi everybody, welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about Enneagram Type 6 and two movies that I really like. And I got to say, one of them I hadn't seen since it was in the theater, quite a long time ago. And I don't recall liking it as much as I did this time. But the two movies are Meet the Parents, which is I loved from the beginning. I always thought that was a very, very funny movie. And the other one is Erin Brockovich with... what's that young girl's name that made a few movies way back?
Julie something.
Yeah, there you go. Julia Roberts. Okay, great. Yeah, Eric's little sister. Yeah, okay, that's the one. So anyway, Meet the Parents and Erin Brockovich are our movies today. So TJ Dahl, had you seen both of these before?
I had seen Erin Brockovich when it was relatively new. I saw it in the rep cinemas around the time, like not in its first release, but when it was an Oscar contender, and Julia Roberts won Best Actress for it. And loved it, hadn't seen it since. Meet the Parents, never saw.
Wow.
And just to pick up on a conversation we had when we weren't recording a week ago, I realized why when I watched it. Is because I had a real bug up my ass about the director, Jay Roach, because I refused to forgive him for the travesty that is Austin Powers, which I saw in the theaters when it came out with my first serious girlfriend, and our opinions about it precipitated our breakup.
Really?
That's
wow.
A slight exaggeration.
Wow.
But not, and I can also see that there was some bullshit going on in terms of the fact that she was part of a summer theater company that I wasn't in. And that movie was huge that summer and everybody was quoting it. Everybody was quoting the catchphrases, which aren't funny in and of themselves. And it really felt like a big insiders club where everybody was in on it except me. And I had loved Mike Myers on Saturday Night Live. And then suddenly everybody was into him. And I considered them all these Johnny-come-latelys. So fuck you, Mike Myers. Fuck you, Jay Roach, for making this horrendous film. I don't want to have anything to do with you or anything you do.
Wow.
So it took this for me to see it. And guess what? Great movie. Hilarious.
Yeah. Good. Well, I don't know what to say about Austin Powers because I loved Austin Powers. And I got to say, so I'll share just the exact opposite experience, TJ, because I saw it on opening weekend in a theater filled with people. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was probably the only person in the theater laughing. In fact, my wife nudged me a few times because I was embarrassing her by laughing so much at Austin Powers. So I just thought Austin Powers was hilarious.
Well, you must have felt vindicated when it became a massive hit.
I did. I was an early adopter. So, TJ Ingracia, do you have an opinion? Break the tie here. Do you have an opinion on Austin Powers?
I wasn't allowed to see Austin Powers when it came out.
So with good reason.
I still don't know that I have ever actually seen. I know I've seen clips on YouTube, and I know a lot of the quotes and Dr. Evil and all that, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen any of the films all the way through.
All right. Well, anyway, let's put that behind us, and we'll move on to Enneagram Type 6 and these two movies. All right, so Enneagram Type 6. I've been looking forward to talking about Enneagram Type 6 and these two movies because, again, I think it's a type that is often misunderstood, and particularly the transmitting instinctual bias of the 6, right? The transmitting subtype, which other people, will refer to as the counterphobic 6, and that's the category I would put both of these characters into. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk about the 6 and dispel some of the mythology or the myths about the 6. So type 6 is what we call striving to feel secure. Again, as the name would imply, these are people who are, they want to be secure, and that means they're looking out for danger. They're vigilant people. They're scanning their environment. They're looking for threats so that they can mitigate against them. So if there's something that's going to go wrong, I want to be prepared for it. And the irony is that even though this can make 6s seem kind of fearful, and they often are, they tend to do pretty well in a crisis because they've spent a lot of time preparing for it, right? So, they're the people who are going to know where the first aid kit is, right? So when somebody gets wounded, everybody else is going to be running around like chickens with their head cut off looking for the first aid kit. The 6 goes right to it, brings it over, that sort of thing. So it's a really interesting dichotomy in this. But again, the whole idea is I want to be secure. Now, some people refer to the 6 as the loyalist or the loyal skeptic, those sort of things. Honestly, I don't think that 6s are any more loyal than anybody else is. I think that very often, particularly with the preserving 6, you will see security found within the immediate group, right? Like the family, the team, and so forth. It's not a big group usually. The navigating 6 might be associated with a bigger group, but it's all about getting security, right? I'm loyal because you'll protect me. If I'm part of the tribe, I won't be ostracized. If I'm not ostracized, I won't be in danger. Now, they have a connection to points 9 and 3. At point 9, the strategy is striving to feel peaceful, and that's what we call the neglected strategy for 6s. They have a hard time relaxing. They have a hard time not worrying. They have a hard time, letting their guard down like a 9 might. So this can be a challenge for them. At point 3 is what we call the support strategy, which is striving to feel outstanding. And so what we often see in 6s is this effort to point out how much value they bring, right? How much they have to offer to the rest of the group. Because if I bring in value, then again, I'll be accepted as part of the group and I'll be safe. Okay. Core qualities of point 6, the core quality at point 6 is confidence. And this is kind of the key issue for the 6 is I don't know if I have what it takes to survive, right? So their confidence is stunted in their childhood, and they're trying to recapture that sense of confidence. Now, when they're doing it in a fixated way, it's through this focus on security, identifying danger and so forth. But it can grow into just a natural, broader sense of confidence as they mature. Benevolence at point 9 is also stunted. I don't know that I'm good enough. And the sense of value at point 3, the 3's core quality, is stunted as well. Do I have value? Do I bring something of worth to the group? These are big fears that the 6 has. Fear is the traditional vice of the 6, right? It's this anxiety, not just of danger in the exterior, but danger of taking a position, right? If I take one position, it's like I'm letting go of all the other options, not in the way of a 7 who, if I have this for dessert, it means I can't have that for dessert. For the 6, it's if I decide this or I believe this, what if I'm wrong? What bad thing's going to happen? So you often see them questioning themselves. They make a decision and then they change their mind and then they change it back and so forth. The fixation of the 6 is cowardice. And this is interesting because I went looking in some of the more traditional books about this idea of cowardice and exactly what do they mean by that. And honestly, there weren't really good descriptions in either Naranjo or Sandra Maitre that I looked for. But when I looked up the word cowardice in the dictionary, it's one of the definitions is lack of courage or firmness of purpose. Which I found interesting. And going back to that thing I said about changing the mind, right? I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do. Now, what ends up happening is a fixated 6 can almost become a fanatic about things, right? They can become so devoted to a cause that, they have this tremendous zeal. They can be a dog with a bone and not let go of something that once they commit to it. But they have to overcome this cowardice to get there. And in fact, sometimes that's an example of cowardice, right? I latch on to this thing so I don't have to question my views. I don't have to make, ad hoc assessments about gray zones. And finally, the virtue is courage. Okay, this is what the 6 aspires to. This is what, is the antidote for fear, but also the high quality. And this is something we see in 6s as they become more healthy, is a true confidence, courage, a willingness to go into the breach if you will, and engage with things, even if it's kind of scary. Okay, so those are the classic sort of issues about the 6. Guys, anything about the 6 that you would add?
A couple things come to mind. One is that a healthy 6 is often very playful. You'll find a 6 can be a good, fun friend who enjoys teasing, and that's a form of shoring up a relationship and bonding. Another thing is I've heard it said that 6s are the most numerous Enneagram type there is out there. I can't imagine how anyone would determine that. And what I have experienced is that 6s are abundantly represented in people who attend Enneagram workshops. And I believe that that's because a fundamental part of the 6 psyche is this belief that I don't have the answer, but somebody out there does. And if I find the right source with the right wisdom, and if I ask the right questions, then I'll know what to do, and then I'll be okay. So you find a lot of 6s wanting to know the answer and then wanting to ask a lot of questions because I want to get to the root of it. And the ultimate journey of a 6 is learning to trust myself, that the light that I've been searching for is actually inside me this whole time.
Yeah. I'm glad you qualified that alleged statistic, TJ, because I've seen that a number of times too. And number one, there's just no way to know, right? I mean, you would have to have somebody reliable assess every person on the planet, or at least a substantial enough representation. Number two, it's just not my anecdotal experience, right? There seem to be as many 6s as any others. But in the Enneagram world, as in many worlds, there can be a sampling bias like you're talking about, right? Certain things attract certain types. So I would agree with that.
One more thing is I have also found, and this is just my experience, so my limited reach, is that it's not unusual for a 6 to take a long time to settle on the fact that they're a 6. Because again, part of the 6 psyche is not always, but often this oppositionality. So with every statement of certainty, there's another part of them that can't help but say, but then again, and 6s are in many ways a bundle of opposites. And this is something that Riso Hudson said in The Wisdom of the Enneagram. They're sweet, but they're also sour, and they're loners, but they're also group people, and they're trusting, and they're also cynical. And that, describing that combination, that bundle of opposites, that can be the exact thing that makes a 6 go, that's me. And that's why I've never found myself in any kind of typology before, is because no matter what the question is on the test, I can always answer yes, but also no.
Yeah. Which speaks to that. It's a version of that cowardice that I mentioned, right? Of not being willing to make a firm stance on certain things, but also this bouncing around, right? I am this and that. I am that and this, and so forth. I would agree. I find that in my experience, 6s and 4s are the two types that, at least in the corporate world, have the biggest challenge identifying themselves. So, because 4s just don't want to admit that they're a type. Again, in my corporate environment. In the Enneagram world in general, I think 4s love the Enneagram, right? So they're,
if and when they get over that hump, which I had to as well, of like, I don't want to be put in a box.
Yes.
I'm not one of 9.
Right. It's funny. I like to, kind of tell how in almost every training I do in an organization, there's somebody who says, well, I can see why TJ's this type and Mary's that type and Joe is that type, but I'm different. I'm more complicated than other people, et cetera. And my response is always, yeah, we've got a category for you too. So.
You're special, just like everybody else.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, so the first movie we're going to talk about is Meet the Parents. Who's going to tell us about Meet the Parents? Is that you, TJ and Gracia?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Meet the Parents is the 2000 comedy film directed by Jay Roach of Austin Powers fame or infamy. The story revolves around Greg Fokker, spelled with an O, a male nurse played by Ben Stiller, who plans to propose to his girlfriend Pam, but only after he meets her parents and secures her father's blessing. Upon arrival, he discovers that Pam's father, Jack, played by Robert De Niro, is an intimidating and overly protective former CIA operative. Jack immediately becomes suspicious of Greg and begins questioning his every move. As the weekend progresses, Greg's attempts to impress Jack are met with one unfortunate incident after another. Hilarity ensues, including a disastrous volleyball game, a lost cat named Jinx, and an incident involving a lie detector test. Greg's nerves continue to fray, causing a rift between him and Pam, and his interactions with Jack become increasingly tense and hostile. However, Greg's genuine love for Pam and his willingness to overcome the obstacles ultimately win Jack's grudging respect.
Pam is the one Greg wants to marry.
Just relax, honey. He's gonna love you.
But before he can pop the question, he'll have to meet
Hi, Daddy.
the parents.
What are you driving there, Ford?
Oh, yeah.
It's an interesting color. You pick it?
Oh, no, the Hearst guy picked it. Why?
No, they say geniuses pick green, but you didn't pick it.
Be nice to this one, okay?
I don't know what it is, but there's just something about him that's a little off.
It's an antique polygraph machine.
Why don't you try that on?
That's okay.
Oh, come on, we'll have some fun.
Greg, my father was never in the rare flower business.
Don't worry, you'll enjoy this.
He was in the CIA for 34 years.
Great. Yeah, I was scared of your dad back when I thought he was a florist.
I'm a patient man. That's what 19 months in a Vietnamese prison camp will do to you. But I will be watching you.
Meet the parents.
You think that CIA, man? They teach you that in the CIA? You have another question? Sure, I got one question for you. Do I think you're a psycho? Yes.
That's my future son-in-law.
Can you deal with that?
I saw in the research that it was Jim Carrey's idea to give him the name Fokker, because Jim Carrey was one of the early candidates to play that role. Thank goodness they didn't use him. I'm not a big Jim Carrey fan, and so I think Ben Stiller did an amazing job at it. But originally Greg didn't have a name. And I had no idea that it was a remake of an earlier movie made with a budget of about $100,000 and then remade 10 years later or so. Right.
I'd really like to see that original movie.
I would too. It would be interesting to go back and do a comparison of them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's available anywhere, but
yeah. All right. So, and it was called Meet the Parents, is the original also. So,
which I got to say is a perfect title.
Yeah, say more.
I do a bit in my solo show course about coming up with a good title. You know what isn't a good title? Wonder Boys. If you knew nothing about the movie Wonder Boys, if all you knew was the title, what would you think it was about? Would you even know the genre? Would you know the tone? I posit no to all of those questions, whereas Meet the Parents, there's no ambiguity whatsoever in subject, genre, and tone. Perfect title that sets up the premise of the movie, which I see as inherently six-ish, because the notion of meeting a loved one's parents is inherently fraught with anxiety, much less, not only am I going to meet them, I'm going to ask for the dad's blessing to marry the daughter, and we're going to be staying with them. You know, I'm not just meeting them for dinner, I'm in their house. And then the fact that the dad turns out to be the nightmare dad. Like, I think this movie was just perfectly set up to capture a lot of six-ish things of what if I had to meet my partner's parents? What if the dad not only is intimidating, but turned out to be a former, not only CIA operative, but interrogator? What if I kept,
and spy hunter.
What if I kept doing and saying the wrong thing? What if every joke I said landed with a thud? What if every attempt I made to connect actively made things much, much worse?
Yes. What if I lost my luggage and the airline accidentally sent me a suitcase filled with dildos and other sex toys, right? So,
and I can just imagine like all of these things could be in the mind of a six who is going to experience this thing. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if that happens?
Right.
In real life, it's impossible to imagine that the weekend would have played out as disastrously as this, although it does resolve, of course. But it's easy for me to picture a six thinking of all of these things and vibrating with anxiety on the plane on the way to meet the parents.
Yeah. So we're in agreement then that the Ben Stiller character was also a six, right? And the De Niro character. And the De Niro character would be pretty easy to mistake as an eight if you didn't really understand the Enneagram and understand the transmitting six. But it is a transmitting six and not an eight. And the reason for that is because it is all about striving to be secure. It is all about reactivity to danger rather than dominance, power, and control, as it is with an eight. Right? It would have been a very different movie if the character was an eight.
And it's also reactivity to perceived danger.
Yes.
Greg has a lot going for him as a potential suitor for your daughter.
Yeah.
He's well-groomed. He's gainfully employed. He's polite. He's respectful. He ticks every single box. And of course, Jack is just like, something's up with this guy. I can't trust him. And that's something that I've also seen, read, and heard from sixes is the anxiety really gets going when there's nothing wrong. When everything is calm and peaceful, that's when the mind prevaricates of all the things that could go wrong. Whereas if the shit has hit the fan, there's no room for that. The six will go right into action and actually deal with it.
Yeah. TJ and Gracia, what about this movie was six-ish for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just sort of all the things you guys have been talking about. The distinction between the transmitting six and the eight. Robert De Niro's character has this, what you call in the Enneagram guidebook, suspicious vigilance and probing the environment for danger. Actually, I think it's in Awareness to Action where you said that. But yeah, it's a reactivity, but it's driven by this fear of what could go wrong and where are the threats. Actually, it was interesting contrasting watching this film and thinking about Father of the Bride, which we talked about in the Preserving episode, where, you know, the daughter brings home the new boyfriend and the six father does not like it. But the difference between the Preserving six and the transmitting six is obviously the difference in the reactions that these two men have. The transmitting six, their philosophy is more like the best defense is a good offense.
Yes.
And the Preserving six is maybe more like the best offense is a good defense.
Yeah, right.
Or something along those lines. And then the Navigating six is like, just tell me where to play and I'll,
Right. Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about subtypes here, TJ, and then I'm going to throw it back to you for, any scenes that jumped out for you that really illustrated this. But in a lot of the Enneagram literature, there's this idea of phobic versus counterphobic sixes. And I think that's a little bit simplistic. And in fact, I was just reading in, I think it was Sandra Maitre's book, that Naranjo identified a third version of the six, which he was referring to as the navigating or social six, as he would have called it. But I forget exactly what the term was that he used. Here's the way I see it. All sixes, just like everybody else, can be fearful and react aggressively against fear, right? This is just part of our natural biology, right? What are some of the options that we have under threat, right? Fight or flight, okay? And some of us will, and there's also comply, right? Or, whatever. But generally, most of us will sort of weigh the situation subconsciously or consciously and pick one of those choices. I better run. This bear is really big. I'm getting out of here, right? Or this thing is, I can take this and I'm slower than it is, so I'm going to fight, right? So this is what we do. And these things exist on a continuum for all of us. Sometimes we fight, sometimes we flee, depending. And in all the sixes I know, even the so-called phobic sixes, which would be the preserving subtype, they can be pretty darn aggressive at times under the right circumstances. They can be counterphobic in that sense. Transmitting sixes, however, because of that transmitting instinctual bias, which is all about putting out into the world, not so much protecting ourselves from it like the preserving domain is, they will have more of a tendency to be aggressive, to go against, okay? Because to TJ's point, the best defense is a really good offense. So I'm going out at it. Okay? So this is how I see this. It's not phobic versus counterphobic. It's just that the transmitting six is a logically more aggressive character given their personality profile. Okay. And again, I think we see that in certainly in Jack Burns, the Robert De Niro character, whereas I see the Ben Stiller character as more of a navigating six in my experience, or in my observation of this movie. So a little bit of both, okay? Bit phobic, bit assertive, depending on the circumstances. So thoughts on that, and then I'm going to ask TJ about particular scenes or anything else about the movie.
Something that I noticed in the movie is that Jack's concerns seem to be very much in the preserving domain. Like he doesn't dress in a flashy way. He's very domestic. He's created his own business making surveillance cameras for the home. He loves his cat. He's very concerned about who's going to marry his daughter or his other daughter's wedding. that kind of thing. So where do you see the transmitting in him other than his assertive aggression?
So the reason I see him as a transmitting 6 is about it's that need to shape everything around me. Okay, it's that need to take my point of view and put it out into the world. My need to teach people, okay, of how you should be, right? There were always these lessons he had for them. What did I tell you about packing on for the airplane, that sort of thing? Okay, so in my view, he was trying to shape the world around him a bit more than I would see in a preserving 6 usually. Now, again, it's a situation where probably there's a difference between the acting and the content that might be causing this, right? So maybe I'm seeing the acting of the transmitting 6, but if you read the script, it's more the preserving stuff. Now, that said, for transmitters, the preserving domain is the secondary domain. It's the area of inner conflict. It's the area where they tend to feel insecure. So there's a lot of talk about preserving issues in most transmitters, and particularly transmitting 6s. Okay. So that said, I think you're making a good point, TJ, and an argument could be made either way.
And I don't know if maybe this is stretching the premise of the film too far, but potentially a former CIA operative may have learned in his training over the years not to be flashy. You know, it's better to fly under the radar, be a little quieter, not stand out. So that could be something as well. But that might be pushing it a little too far.
Yeah, and so the transmitting can, take different forms. Like you, TJ Dahl, you're a transmitter, but you're not a flashy guy in the way you dress, right? Your transmitting takes other forms. Okay, it's the performing, for example. It's the expression of your ideas and so forth. Okay, so the dress, the attire is just one data point whenever we're looking at these sort of things. Now, when we talk about Erin Brockovich, okay, now we're the stereotype transmitting, sort of thing. Okay,
they're called boobs, Ed.
Yeah, which is So, but we'll save that conversation until we get to that movie. So, all right, okay. TJ Ingrassia, what else about this movie was 6-ish for you?
One of the opening scenes when they first get to the house, Jack is telling them about his hidden camera business that TJ referenced, and when he's setting up the premise of why he's created this business, he presents a scenario. You want to go out for dinner. You want to leave the kids at home with a babysitter. You've checked the references. Everything checks out. But how can you really know if your kids if your loved ones are safe with this person? And he says, can you ever really trust another human being, Greg? And Greg, thinks for a second. He says, yeah, sure, I think you can. And he says, no, the answer is you cannot. And that's that suspicious vigilance of this. That's really the affect of that 6-ish, is you cannot trust another human being ever.
Right.
And then I think also the scene, the interrogation scene after Greg is sort of shunned from the family. Jack actually gets what he wants. He drives Greg away, or Gaylord. We find out is Greg's real name. So he's going to fly back home. He has a freak out moment on the plane. He says bomb, which you can't say on a plane. Although it was interesting thinking they made this movie before 9/11. Right. So I don't know that you could have used that joke afterwards. It's a little bit dated. So he ends up in an interrogation room, and Jack eventually comes in and is interrogating him. And before this scene happens, Jack sort of gets, Pam says, I love you, Daddy, but sometimes you can be a real jerk, because she's upset that he's driven her boyfriend away. And her wife says, no one's ever been good enough for your daughter. Maybe you should think about what's best for Pam this time. So he goes to interrogate Greg. And there's sort of this sequence where it's almost like a little bit of it's a play on the wedding vows and a proposal. So he says, if you married my daughter, would you support her in the way that she deserves to be supported? Yes. Would you be honest and faithful to her? Yes. Would you devote yourself to her? Of course I would. Gaylord Fokker, will you be my son-in-law? And then he pulls out the ring that Greg has been searching for the whole film. So it was a moment of, I don't know how much growth necessarily Jack has felt in these last few minutes since his wife and his daughter yelled at him. But I think it's probably as much growth as we can expect a person like this to, he's reluctantly agreed. He's still suspicious of Greg. He's going to keep an eye on him, but he's let him back into the circle of trust. And I think sometimes it's important to keep in mind that we talked about this last week, that your greatest strengths are also your greatest weaknesses. And that's true for every type. And so it doesn't mean for Jack to become a healthy, self-actualized person. And this is a fictional character, and it's very hyperbolic and played up for comedic effect. So I don't want to push this too far. But basically, it doesn't mean he doesn't have to be vigilant anymore. He doesn't have to be concerned about the safety of his family and wanting to protect his daughter and all that. But he's grown. He said, okay, I'll put these concerns aside and I'm going to let you back in. So there's some growth towards the end.
Yeah. Great.
I
Great.
loved that scene, particularly because it just seemed like such a good resolution between two sixes. Because for the first time in the movie, both of them, you see their affect change. Both of them. They're calm and steady. And Greg's been telling a lot of little white lies to try and cover up the mistakes that he's been making. But in that conversation, for the first time in the movie, no deception. Let's be straightforward and honest. And Jack can see that. And then Greg gets assertive in his own way and starts asking Jack questions and holds his wrists to feel his heartbeat. Because it's like, I have the right to make demands too. If I'm going to be entering into this family. And he's totally honest about how I wanted to marry your daughter until I met you. And I don't know if I could survive in this family. But there's suddenly this pipeline of honesty and trust that there wasn't before. And you can see that there's an understanding growing between them. And that's the foundation of a solid relationship. And I just thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, agreed. Also, the single funniest line ever. I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me? I've seen this movie so many times, and when I was watching it last night, again, I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard in that scene where Greg is talking about not growing up on a farm and milking a little runt cat named Geppetto. So, yeah, I think, when it comes to what is six-ish about this movie, you pretty much just say everything, right? I mean, there's really very little that's not six-ish. Even the character, the Owen Wilson character, who is not a six, that's not where I'm going, very clearly a 3 from my view at least, was being seen through the eyes of sixes, right? The father was looking at, well, boy, look how successful this guy is, he's amazing, and this is what somebody should be, this is what you should aspire to, whereas Greg was seeing him as a threat and the person not to be in the world. I think somebody that he actually had disdain for, which was very much a navigator view on some transmitters. I think that the Owen Wilson character was probably a transmitting 3 in that. So very much a navigating perspective from Greg. So thoughts on the Owen Wilson character?
Well, I've also known a lot of sixes to get their backs up about 3s in general, whether it's somebody they know or somebody in the media. There can be this kind of reactivity of like, who do they think they are? Just walking around asserting themselves with not 1 ounce of self-consciousness or self-doubt. Like, who does that? There's got to be something wrong with that.
Also, shout out, I was marveling rewatching the movie at how perfect I think Terry Polo was. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name, but as his fiancée to be, I just thought she struck me as the perfect light comedy fiancée. That's the kind of girl you want to marry, is my reaction to that. So I thought she was really fantastic in a fairly simple part.
She seemed pretty 9-ish to me. And the 6-9 combo is one that I have seen a lot in people that I know. And
yeah.
Again, no way of knowing how universal that is. I just have my limited view of people I've interacted with or talked about these things, but it's a couple conversation or combination I've seen a lot. And I wonder if it's the calm steadiness of the 9 really gives something needed to the anxiety prone 6.
Yeah. I would agree. I've seen that relationship in ways that seems to be disproportionate to what relationship, combinations could be. I also see, I think there is something to that person providing something that I need, right? That's often why we choose someone. I see lots of 8-2 relationships as well, very often. The 8, usually it's the 8 male and the 2 female. I also have seen a surprising number of 5-2 relationships, which is quite challenging for both of them, but as are all relationships. But anyway, yeah, I would agree, TJ, common relationship. Okay, so that brings us to the conclusion of our discussion of Meet the Parents. Again, funny movie. If for some reason you've been holding out against anything related to the director for any psychotic reason, it's time you can go ahead and watch this movie. So really good movie. If you want to find out more about my work with the Enneagram and organizations of all kinds, or our certification programs, visit me at mariosakura.com or follow me on social media.
Hi, I'm TJ Daw, and I do one-on-one consulting on creative projects of all kinds, as well as Enneagram coaching. I teach an online course on how to create your own one-person show, and I speak at events and perform shows of my own. For more information, go to my website, www.tjdawe.ca.
This is TJ Ingrassia. To check out my YouTube series Typecast, which explores the Enneagram through film and television, go to youtube.com/typecast. And if you're interested in my professional video production services, check out tjingrassia.com.
All right, our next movie is Erin Brockovich, made the same year as Meet the Parents, both made in 2000, as was Wonder Boys. What a good year for movies that was. So, TJ Dahl, you're going to tell us about Erin Brockovich.
So yes, Erin Brockovich was directed by Steven Soderbergh, written by Susanna Grant, and it's based on the true story of Erin Brockovich, played by Julia Roberts, who was a single mother of 3 living in LA, given to profanity and cleavage-bearing clothes, who forces her way into a job at a small law firm run by a man named Ed Masry, played by Albert Finney. And while looking into a file on a case of a couple fending off Pacific Gas and Electric who was trying to buy their home, she discovers that the multi-billion-dollar company had poisoned the groundwater in the small community of Hinckley in the Mojave Desert, 2 hours outside of LA. So even though she isn't a lawyer and has no experience working in the law in any capacity, she helps to gather current and former residents of the town into a class action suit to get compensation for the many dire health problems that they have suffered as a result of the poisoned groundwater. They end up winning and getting a huge settlement, and the movie ends with her knocking on a door as she's already hard at work on another class action suit.
You want my number?
I do.
How about this for number 6? That's how old my daughter is. 8 is the age of my son. 2 is how many times I've been divorced. 16 is the number of dollars I have in my bank account.
I'm so glad we got that out of the way, because I didn't find you attractive either.
Then we're even. I'm smart, I'm hardworking, and I'll do anything, and I'm not leaving here without a job. Don't make me beg.
In a law firm, you may want to rethink your wardrobe a little.
Well, as long as I have 1 ass instead of 2, I'll wear what I like, if that's all right with you. You might want to rethink those ties. Why are there medical records and blood samples in real estate files? Would you mind if I investigate this a little further?
What makes you think you can just walk in there and find what we need?
They're called boobs, Ed.
You're emotional, you're erratic, you make this personal, and it isn't.
That is my work, my sweat, my time away from my kids. If that's unpersonal, I don't know what is. We're gonna get them, Erin, aren't we? They're all signed, every single one.
How did you do this?
Seeing as how I have no brains or legal expertise, I just went out there and performed 634 sexual favors. I'm really quite tired.
So, like I said at the beginning of our podcast, I saw this when it was in the theater, and I remember thinking, yeah, it was okay. Not wild about it. It's not something I got all excited about. And in fact, I hadn't seen it until we decided to do it for this podcast. And I really think this is a good movie. I was really, really impressed. I am a big Steven Soderbergh fan. I think he's one of our most gifted directors. I think he's had some misses, like every creative person has. But I was fascinated by the 4-year run during which Erin Brockovich was at the heart. You had 1998's Out of Sight with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. In 1999, you had The Limey with Terrence Stamp and Peter Fonda. Have you guys seen The Limey?
love The Limey.
What a movie, man. I love, love, love that movie. It's just, and, one of these days we'll do an 8 episode focused on that. That is a transmitting 8, my friend, the Terrence Stamp character. TJ and Grassi, it looks like you haven't seen The Limey, huh?
I have not. I don't think I've ever even heard of it.
It wasn't big.
No.
It just kind of came and went. But, is it same with Out of Sight?
Yeah. And after The Limey was Erin Brockovich. In the same year, Traffic, the remake of the British miniseries about the drug trade. Have you guys seen Traffic? Are you fans of that movie?
Yeah, back in the day. It's in the same rep cinemas that I saw Erin Brockovich.
Good. And then that was followed by Ocean's 11, which is a great, fun movie. And I think in this period, with the exception of Limey is not the most accessible movie, but he had a run of really adult, grown-up, mature, fun, interesting, engaging movies that is hard to top. I mean, that's a heck of a run of movies right there. So, big Steven Soderbergh fan, and especially of these movies. All right, good. So, TJ Dahl, what about this movie was 6 to you?
Well, may as well get into this before we do anything else. Like, this is a character who could easily be mistaken for an 8 because Erin Brockovich is incredibly aggressive, and that's her signature. That's the way anybody would describe her. That word would come more than anything else. So, we had a bit of a conversation offline about this, but I think it's probably really valuable to get into what this character would look like if it was cast as an 8 and directed to play the role as an 8. Yeah. And primarily, I think it comes down to her affect. She's very aggressive, but she's always aggressive in response to some perceived threat, not always an actual threat, but it's a very reactive anger. And 8s, I find, are much more powerful even when they're resting. And a male actor that comes to mind when I think of this is Michael Madsen. How he doesn't have to yell, he doesn't have to flex, he doesn't have to fight somebody or threaten somebody. Just in his calm stability, he exudes power. And I was trying to think of who could conceivably have played a female role in that same way. And I can't think of a perfect equivalent, but Sigourney Weaver came to mind. Or, if it had been made in the right year, Bette Davis, of just that calm steadiness, as opposed to the fact that Erin Brockovich is much more prone to flying off the handle. So when she's on the stand, at the beginning of the movie, she gets in a car accident and she's brought to court, and the lawyer for the defense needs about 2 sentences to get her to go from charming and friendly to suddenly yelling and swearing on the stand and blowing out her own case. And that's a pattern that we see again and again in her interactions throughout the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think you're right. This is an important conversation because it would be very easy to see her as an 8. And it wouldn't be a, tremendously off the mark argument, but it was in those, I agree with you, the reactivity and the over the top reactivity. The scene that really struck out to me upon rewatching was when she jumped all over that female lawyer at their first meeting. Right. And it was all I kept thinking is she's actually being pretty respectful to you. And what she's asking for, to have these 600 people's phone numbers written down instead of being in your head, is not unreasonable. Right. I mean, in fact, that's kind of 101 responsible, governance of an organization. We need to have the data, how can we work with this? And just this over the top insulting sort of thing, it was really kind of unlikable, right? In my view, very very reactive, like you said. There was also these acts of assertion, of which there were many, because she was a very aggressive character, right? But they would often be bookended by these flashes of insecurity, doubt, and wavering. There was the scene, for example, when she goes in demanding a job, and she's very confrontational, and then she whispers, "Don't make me beg," right? Now, an 8 might have done that, but with a very different affect. And you're right. I mean, it's, going into those situations, because I was looking for an analog as well, TJ, for a transmitting actor, female actor, to be in that role. And the closest I could come up with was Sigourney Weaver. And again, just a very different affect. And that sort of everything from the Julia Roberts acting seemed to come from her face, right? The rage, the everything was just up high, whereas with a Sigourney Weaver, it's coming from the belly, right? In that way. So I would agree with you. It was the affect that was the giveaway for me. So TJ and Gracia, thoughts?
I think those are all great arguments to point out. Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. She's a very reactive character. And I think, if thinking about her as an 8, I really don't think it would be fair to say that she's striving to feel powerful. That doesn't really feel like the main thing that's driving her.
Right.
I don't know, in terms of the affect, I don't know that just out of the blue, I would say, is she striving to feel secure? I mean, as we talked offline, she's a single mom with 2 young kids and a 9-month-old baby who apparently just went through a horrible, if the father of a 9-month-old baby is not around, something horrible must have happened. Right. She's unemployed. So that's going to create a lot of stress and anxiety in anyone. So, any single mother in that situation is going to be striving to feel secure.
Yes.
But yeah, I think I agree about the reactivity. And I think that reactivity is probably the key.
Yeah. There were a couple of other things too, in addition to the affect, that were giveaways for 6 to me rather than 8. There was the scene where she was finally warming up to the Aaron Eckhart character, who, by the way, in one of his early scenes in the movie sounded just like Seth Rogen to me. And I couldn't get Seth Rogen out of my head for the rest of the movie, so it was a really weird watching experience. So, and again, I would say that character was probably a transmitting 9, and again, we've got another 6-9 sort of relationship. Anyway, something that she says to him when she starts warming up to him is, "You're not going to be something else that I have to survive, are you? Because I don't think I'm up to it." And the core fear, the core stunting of the 6 is around confidence. I don't know what I have to take. I don't know if I have what it takes to survive. Okay? And that was just a great expression of it. The other thing is, at point 3, there's this issue of value. Right. And there were a number of times when she would say things about her value. Right. At the end, it was all about, number one, she got upset with him when he gave her the check because she assumed that he was violating her trust, right? That there was a trust issue behind it. And also she was talking about the importance of her value to doing this, right? And this is something I see in 6s is this, wait a minute, I'm really important here. Did you see what I did? Did you see what I did? When they access that 3 place. There was also a scene when George is leaving her, and she said, "For the first time in my life, I walk into a room and people want to know what I have to say." That's not something you hear from 8s, right? I mean, with 8s, they're used to people, noticing when they walk into the room and waiting to hear what they have to say, right? So again, just a very different character.
And an 8's going to tell you what they have to say, whether you want to hear it or not.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so talk a little bit more about the movie, then I'll talk a little bit more about the difference between 6 and 8. So additional thoughts on the movie.
Well, there's another scene where she gets a threatening phone call from someone anonymous who's trying to scare her off from investigating this case. And she just receives it. And then, within the same scene, George tries to talk her into quitting and getting another job. And she throws it back in his face. And it occurred to me that a 6 would be more prone to fear if there was no threat. What happens at a certain point in this movie, once this case becomes clear of what exactly is going on, and they reference this blatantly, she's in a David and Goliath situation. And when there's a clear and present danger, especially when it's clear and present dangers in the form of a great, big, powerful authority is stomping on the little person, that's when a 6 can go right into action. and the doubt evaporates. And they're doing exactly the right thing. And they have this calm steadiness because there's an oppositional force. And if there's no oppositional force, like I was saying earlier, that's when the mind goes into forecasting disaster. She's in that situation somewhat even before that, given that she's a single mom with 3 kids and she's broke and she's behind on her bills. She seemingly is unemployable. And then she gets in this car accident. Like, the deck is really stacked against her. So she's got a lot of things that she's battling that are real. These are not phantoms in her mind. So she's got something to push against. And then when she goes up against Pacific Gas and Electric, she's got something huge to push against. And she is definitely right. And that's part of why the story is so wonderful and so inspiring, is it really just shows the value of sixes, because this is a case that she found. This seemingly was a simple pro bono real estate deal. And she smelled a rat and looked into it. And then another real six thing is that she relates to all the people in Hinckley as an equal. She can really talk to them on their level. And we see that when it's contrasted with Teresa, who's the real lawyer, going in and trying to talk to them. She's dressed like a lawyer and she's speaking to them like a lawyer. And it's really off-putting, whereas she relates to them as an equal. And same with her, like gathering water samples and like reaching down into the ditch and things like that. She fights on the front lines as opposed to commanding people, getting a team working under her and telling them what to do. She really just does seem like one of the people fighting as an equal against this huge oppressive force.
But I did like at the very end when her boss gives her the check, surprises her with a $2 million bonus, and she thought it was going to be less. And she just kind of stands there with her mouth open, unable to say anything for the first time in the movie. And he says, kind of throwing her line from earlier in the film back in her face, he says, "Do they teach beauty queens how to apologize? Because you suck at it." And then he kind of dances out of the office. That was a good moment.
Yeah. A great Albert Finney role. I thought he was really, really good in this movie. Earlier, TJ, you mentioned about how she found this big case on her own because she was just hired to file documents. And she saw something in one of the documents that caught her attention. And it was because she was filing real estate documents and realized that there were some medical documents in with the file. And she started saying, well, what's going on here? And this is something for sixes that I call the dog with the bone syndrome. When something doesn't feel right, I just can't let it go, right? I just know there's something wrong here because something wrong indicates a potential threat, a potential problem. So they hold on to it. And this is a great, great example of a dog with a bone sort of experience or a dog with a bone character. Okay. Different again from the 8, right? 8s will stick with things, but 8s usually their go after itness is more in service of a clearly defined, identified, articulated goal or threat. Okay, it's not necessarily just something's wrong here and I need to figure out what it is. An 8 in that sort of case most likely would just say, yeah, well, whatever, and just push it to the side and move on in most cases. Okay, so a little bit different there because again, that was something that I can see people confusing the 6 and the 8 with. Of, well, she went at it and didn't give up and so forth.
Something that I've experienced as well, talking with a lot of 6s, particularly in workshops where someone's kind of wrestling with the fact that they very well probably are a 6, is it's not unusual for a 6 to have a hard time discerning what's good about being a 6. I've known a lot of 6s to, when they eventually settle into it, their energy is very much like, oh no, I don't want to be the fearful, anxious type. Why can't I be the fun type? Why can't I be the artsy type? Why can't I be the loving, kind type? Why I have to be the scared type? Oh, great. And it's things like you just described that really show just how wonderful a 6 can be and how valuable a 6 can be. And the final moment of the entire movie shows her stepping up to a door. They've got a new class action case. Part of what made the first case work was that her individual touch, she went up to all of these doors, knocked on doors related to people as an equal, got them to sign on to the class action suit. Now she's doing it again with an even bigger case. And she's smiling. It's a subtle smile, but it's there that to me communicated that she's exactly where she's supposed to be. And it brought to mind, and I ended up looking it up, scene from the end of The Grapes of Wrath, where Tom Joad is leaving his family and saying why he's leaving and what he's going to do. He's says, a fella ain't got a soul of his own, but only a piece of a big one. I'll be everywhere. We're getting emotional just reading this. Where there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad, and I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise and live in the houses they build, why, I'll be there. And I think that's, to me, 6 at their finest.
Yeah.
Is I'm part of something bigger, and I'm working for all of us so that everyone has a chance, so that everyone has an opportunity, and this only works if we all work together. It's not about me. It's about all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that 6s are one of the types. Well, again, they're misrepresented in very specific ways. The stereotype of the 6 in the Enneagram literature is this fearful, Woody Allen-ish, phobic kind of person who's a scaredy cat and running away from every threat. The reality is that most 6s are more like you just described there, TJ, right? People who are committed to something, people who want to make something happen, people who are committed to the well-being and safety and security of others, and who bring something to that others don't have. When I was president of the IEA 10, 12 years ago, our treasurer was a 6, and she was also an attorney by training. And wonderful, wonderful woman, and who I just adored, and could drive people crazy with some of her 6-ishness at times, pointing out, things that could go wrong, for example. But I relied on her so much to say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Tell me what's going to go wrong, right? And then I could mitigate for it. Right? So things that I would have never seen, I would have never been able to predict, she could. Right? And did it in a way that, because she cared. Right? So, wonderful, wonderful qualities there. And 6s are not all wimps, right? They're not Woody Allen-ish wimps. We've talked about this before. The Jack Burns character, kind of scary guy. Right? Not really a wimp. We've talked about Mel Gibson in most of his movies, William Wallace, not particularly a wimp. Okay. Martin Riggs, not particularly a wimp, and so forth. So a lot of very strong, assertive 6 characters, and certainly Erin Brockovich, not a wimp. All right. So final thoughts on either of these movies or type 6s in movies in general.
One thing I want to say is that I've found as I was considering this, building off our initial conversation that was happening on WhatsApp, what are the differences between a transmitting 6 and an 8? The very conversation is actually really 6-ish in terms of, how do we know that something's true? How do we know that a system or a structure or an idea is sound? Question it, and question it relentlessly. Don't just take it for an authority's word. Look for cracks, poke at it. Does it hold up? Make them show evidence, examine the evidence, evaluate it. Then you can build something you can trust. And there's huge value in that, not just in this conversation, but in all realms of life.
Yeah. I also want to say, going on that note of the distinction between 6s and 8s, because I think this is important. People talk about how 8s have this fear of being vulnerable, right? That's their, basic fear or whatever. Well, I don't know anybody that's not afraid of being vulnerable, right? I mean, who says, oh yeah, I want to be vulnerable, come hurt me kind of thing, right? My view is that these Enneagram types are not a reaction to something. They're a wiring toward something, toward maintaining an affective regulatory state. Okay? Meaning, TJ Dahl is not a 4 because you have this fear of something. You are just wired to strive to be unique, strive to feel unique, right? So it's a positive moving towards something. Now, I understand this is a chicken and the egg question, okay? And how do we really know? And we don't. But every 8 I talk to, and I was just on a panel of 8s the other night. I typically don't do that kind of thing, but I was asked by a friend to sit in on a panel of type 8s. And every 8 up there, there were 5 of us, said, you know what? I'm just not really afraid of being vulnerable, right? I'll tell you whatever you want to know about me. I'm not afraid of you knowing things about me. And I don't get up in the morning and be motivated by that. What I want is to be powerful and capable and competent, okay, to have an impact on things. And if I am not those things, that's what I'm afraid of, okay? And so it's different, okay? The motivation is different. Now, with 6s, there is this motivation to not be in danger, right? I want to be secure. Now, it's the same thing, right? I want to be secure, okay? Which means I'm trying to move away from threats. I'm trying to identify and go after threats. But it is much more for the 6 around awareness of insecurity than it is for the 8. And therefore, when you see the affect of an 8, you don't see that sort of twitchiness that you see in the Erin Brockovich character, right? 8's, to your point earlier, TJ, with Michael Madsen. Michael Madsen's not a twitchy guy, okay? He's just there. Okay. So this is one of the key distinctions. It's not so much that, 8s are afraid of being vulnerable and 6s are, afraid of, things. There's this movement towards something, but with the 6, you'll see more of a twitchiness, more of an underlying anxiety that leaks out that you don't see in the 8. So, I don't know if that was coherent, but the key point is around the anxiety leaking out. It's just not an 8 thing. Okay, TJ, 6s in movies. Any further comments on 6s in movies?
Yeah, if somebody is a 6 or would like to see more 6 or would like to experience the world like a 6, I would recommend watching thrillers and suspense movies. They can really bring you into that state of anxiety. Something's wrong, something is closing in, something threatening is coming for me now. Film noir as well. Film noir is about the world is a threatening place and the main character is stuck in a maze with no exit as they circle the drain and bring about their own demise. Some movies and movie stars with a lot of 6 going on is The Hunger Games. I find Katniss Everdeen to be a great 6. We mentioned Julia Roberts in other roles. I agree. I think Pretty Woman is a great playful 6. She plays a lot of playful 6s in a lot of other roles. Same with Meg Ryan. So Meg Ryan in Sleepless in Seattle, Meg Ryan in When Harry Met Sally. Then there's the more kind of aggressive 6, Eminem in 8 Mile, or Holly Hunter in Broadcast News. And the more fearful 6, pretty much anything Albert Brooks has ever played. Albert Brooks was in season 1 with Defending Your Life. I would also name Finding Nemo. His character Marlin in that is a great fearful 6 who's rising up to something he's terrified of and being brilliant. And another great movie, Postcards from the Edge. Meryl Streep plays a character that's very blatantly based on Carrie Fisher, whose novels and memoirs are absolutely wonderful and seized with 6-ishness. And that's one of my favorite movies ever. Oh, and then one more movie that I just love, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think the Leonardo DiCaprio character is very much a 6 in that he's hesitating and reactive and self-punishing in certain scenes. And then when he's got his big chance, when he's doing a guest spot on a TV show, just absolutely nails it. And same with at the end when there's a big confrontation with the Manson gang.
Yeah, that's good. I'll throw in too, I mentioned already Mel Gibson, who, it breaks my heart to see Mel canceled, and deservedly so, to be kind of, looked down upon. But I got to tell you, I still love Mel Gibson movies. And Steven Seagal, I always used as an example of a 6 to counteract the Woody Allen sort of stereotype. So Steven Seagal in real life seems very, very much like a transmitting 6, and most of his movie characters are the same. All right, guys, thank you. So this was a good episode, and so we're wrapping up our conversation about the 3, 6, and the 9. And again, just reiterate that, like we talked about with the 3 and with the 9, The 3, 9, and 6 all have the same sort of issues, just sort of twisted up in a different priority. So a lot of similarities, a lot of overlap, a lot of wrestling with the same issues in different ways. Always fun to talk about those 3 types together. So with that, we'll wrap up this episode, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. Be sure to join us for the next exciting episode. In the meantime, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and join us on social media.